Welcome back to the Seedy AF podcast. I'm Jocelyn.
And I'm the Omega. We're excited to have you with us for another episode where we delve into the fascinating world of adult visual novels. Now let's get seedy.
In today's episode, we'll be answering a series of questions from our community members about our favorite adult visual novels and the sources of inspiration that have influenced us. Callisto on our Patreon asked, do you still find the time to play AVNs yourself? If so, has the way you played them changed since you started creating them yourself? Are you still able to enjoy them the way that you used to? Or do you analyze them all the time and look at how certain things are done?
So from my end, I definitely still play the adult visual novels, but these days it's definitely much more about the market research than it is for fun. Compared to when I first found out about these kinds of games, there's much less enjoyment. It's much more about work, which might sound kind of sad if you think about it, but on a more fun kind of note, like I do enjoy making these kinds of games and seeing the player feedback, and that's one of the things that kind of keeps me going.
So I'm kind of in the same boat. I don't really play these games much for enjoyment. If I am playing adult visual novels, it's almost always for market research purposes, which doesn't mean that I don't find any enjoyment from them, but I'm probably not enjoying them in the same way that our players are enjoying them or the typical audience is enjoying them. I'm sure part of that is that I'm not the audience for these games. I'm a heterosexual woman, so these games are not made for me. And that doesn't mean that there aren't, straight women that get enjoyment from these games. But I do, like the Omega said, I do enjoy making the games, and I do enjoy making something high quality and making something that I know players are going to enjoy, even if it's not the exact type of thing that I would play. Or, it doesn't mean that the work feels like a chore, and it doesn't mean that I'm just grinding out something that I feel nothing for just for money. I think that lots of things can be true at the same time. I'm not the audience, but I don't enjoy them the way that the audience does, but I enjoy them in my own way. And I think that's probably true for me for lots of forms of entertainment. I'm probably the worst person to watch any TV show or movie with because I'm always overanalyzing everything. So it's not something for me that is unique to adult visual novels. They're not the only things that I'm analyzing from a work standpoint. Pretty much any type of media, I can't help but think about in a more meta sense of, the narrative and the cinematography, the writing, the lighting, every single aspect of any form of entertainment is something that I pick apart. So that also tells you that that's a part of consuming media that I enjoy. The fact that I am always overanalyzing things and learning from them, to me, isn't a bad thing. It's one of the ways that I enjoy media. So while I will say that sometimes playing these games can feel a little bit like homework because I am looking at them through that lens of, what can I learn from this from a professional standpoint? That's true for a lot of other things for me as well. So it's not unique to this genre. And it's the same way that I feel about writing novels. I typically can't read novels in the same genre that I'm writing at a particular moment because it just ends up feeling like homework, even if that was a genre that I really enjoyed before. In order for me to truly suspend that feeling of overanalyzing and just truly immerse myself and enjoy something, it typically has to be pretty far away from whatever it is that I'm working on.
Another thing that I'll mention too is, there have been some comments that we've read out there. Adult visual novel game developers or adult game developers have basically said, yeah, I don't play any other games anymore. And essentially, I kind of feel like that's a little bit silly because, the bar is continually getting raised as more game developers come into this market. And if you aren't keeping up with what's going on in the market, then you may potentially fall behind and not fully understand what players are looking for going forward.
Yeah, I agree. I think for us, that's something that we get enjoyment out of. We're the kind of people that enjoy research. And so, again, even if we're playing the games not for a pure entertainment purpose, but for the purpose of learning something from them, we do enjoy the process of learning from things and making our own work better based on what we've learned from other people. I do know other developers that I've talked to have said that for them, playing other games feels purely like homework. So it's not fun in any way. And they don't enjoy that type of homework, and they don't enjoy that type of research to begin with. So there's nothing for them to really get out of it. And I also know that some developers do not like playing other games because it makes them feel inadequate, or it makes them feel jealous, or it makes them feel insecure about their own work because everybody is going to be better at something than you are. So I do think that every developer has their own comfort level when it comes to that kind of thing and what they get out of playing other games and whether they enjoy it or not. And I do know that there are developers that continue to enjoy adult visual novels purely for entertainment purposes. So I think it's just a really individual thing.
And, the other thing I'll say too is that it's obvious a lot of game developers, especially if you're a solo dev making these kinds of games, like it's a ton of work, and some of these people do it full time, and they may not feel like they have time to really do anything else, including market research. Market research or playing these other games out there is probably super low on the priority list as far as things are concerned. That being said, I will say from our perspective, certainly from mine too, is that, there's a lot of fun playing these games. And like I said, seeing those new features and new animations and being able to talk to these other game developers that are out there and give them props where props are due. Moving on, one of our team members, Mute Hazelnut, and Callisto from Patreon both asked, what are your favorite adult visual novels?
Not including our own, of course. So like I said, I typically tend to enjoy things that are different from what I'm creating, and that's not specific to adult games. That's true for me when it comes to any type of creation. So I typically like games that are actually more game-like than ones that are more story-based, because we make very story-based games. And I also typically enjoy creators that are also women or non-male developers. I get enjoyment just from that sheer fact of knowing that we're part of this small elite group of non-male developers. So with that said, I really enjoy both of Ava Kiss's games, Good Girl Gone Bad and Our Red String. She's incredibly talented and her games are top notch. And she's definitely a developer that, other developers should aspire to be, because her games are extremely high quality. Another female developer is RJ Rhodes. And I really enjoyed her game. I enjoyed her game before I even knew her. And I enjoyed it because it is a little bit more of a sandbox and a little bit more of a game. And I like how the stories are, split up and you can kind of pursue the stories at your own pace. There's such a wide variety of stories, but they're all really wholesome and enjoyable. And another non-male developer that I know that I didn't play their game until after I knew them, but once I played it, I loved it, is Mythos by Nine of Swords. You can either be a male MC or a female MC, and just a really high quality game and a really great story. I also really enjoy What a Legend by Magic Nuts. I think also too, because it's 2D and I primarily do the 3D art for our game, I just have an appreciation for looking at a different aesthetic than what I normally look at all day. And the art in that game is high quality. And it also happens to be another husband and wife developer. So I probably feel a sense of camaraderie with them. And I also like games that are story-driven that are not with adult content. Some of my favorite video games in general are Spiritfarer, Night in the Woods, and Disco Elysium. So I can play those games and use them as an example of how to improve my storytelling. They feel different enough because they're not adult content.
For me, and these are going to be in no particular orders, there's no ranking list or anything. For the 2D games, like with Jocelyn, What a Legend's on the list for me. Summertime Saga for the nostalgia factor. Taffy Tales, Dandy Boy Adventures, Behind the Dune, and then I'm also meaning to try a game called Ravager, since I've heard good things about it. And then for the 3D games, there's Sisterly Lust, The Visit, Power Vacuum, which is mostly the MC and Ophelia in there. A game that's probably not that well known that's called Dark Neighborhood. I thought they did some novel things in there. I thought it was cool. Kindred the Redburns. I really wish that guy would come back and finish it.
That was a really great game. I enjoyed that one too.
Yeah, the dystopian zombie setting was really cool. And then, the storytelling and the characters were believable as well. And then I'm also meaning to fully play through Project Passion and Chasing Sunsets. And then for a non-traditional adult visual novel that has more gameplay involved, I would say, or at least more of the focus, is Orc Massage. I just thought it was super cool. And then the Monster Girls. It was just fun to see something different out there that was successful.
Yeah, I also have a lot of interest in the games that are less adult visual novel, maybe just because we've been immersed in this adult visual novel world for so long. But it is really fun to play games like Orc Massage or, any of the other more kind of clicky games like Dating Sims, and Game Girl is a classic game that really stands up, I think, in terms of just being really easy and quick, but yet really entertaining. So there's definitely a part of me that likes those types of games as well. And I will say that I have played Project Passion and Chasing Sunsets because I think that both of those are really great examples of really good quality adult visual novels that, are just high quality all around and have really great stories. We also had a commenter on YouTube who asked, what do you currently consider to be the best adult visual novels out there, not including our own, obviously? And I would say for me, the way that I kind of interpreted this question and the way that I think about it is just kind of, what is the best kind of industry standards out there, regardless of my own personal feelings about them? Which are the games that I turn to as kind of the standards for the industry or the pillars of the industry? Obviously, Summertime Saga, that is the very first Western adult game that kind of bridged that gap between the Japanese and the Western visual novel market. And I think that it still stands up after 7 years. And I think that's evident in how many people still discover it for the first time and how many people will tell you that it was the very first game that they ever played in this genre. To me, it'll always be kind of the original foundation or pillar of this industry. Then I would say that after that, Being a Dick is really the game that did that same thing, but for 3D visual novels and raised the bar for the genre overall, set a new standard for what Western 3D adult visual novels would be. Along with that, I think Fresh Women is a really great example of, how you can execute a relatively simple game, but that does a really good job at giving people exactly what they want. So, it's a game that I feel like people don't talk about as much, but if you go and look at its reviews, Fresh Women has more reviews than season 1 of Being a Dick. And as I mentioned, I've played Project Passion by Classy Lemon. And so while he's a developer that doesn't get talked about much, I think that's going to be changing now that Project Passion has done so incredibly well on Steam. It's just the number 1 game in so many categories right now. And that's because it's a really high quality game that, again, it knows what it does well, and it does it really well, better than any other developer out there, animations in particular. And, he is a developer that I think other developers should aspire to also, just in terms of his business strategy and his professionalism.
And, I agree with Jocelyn for what the top tier games are that are out there, for our definition of success. So for what I'll do is I'll just go what I think are the runners up in the category. So like for 2D, I will say What a Legend, I think, is the runner up. And I think when that game does come to Steam, I think it's going to take Steam by storm, just because the art and the illustrations in the game are so good, and you can just tell that so much effort has been put into them. And then for the 3D section, I think Eternum fits this bill. Eternum likely won't ever be on Steam for reasons because they can't put the game on there legally, given that it's Honey Select. That being said, I still think that Charybdis, he deserves recognition for what he's done, which is to, in my opinion, get a lot of people who wouldn't even consider a Honey Select kind of game to come and play it, because he does such a great job with it, with the visuals and the whole setup and the story and the humor that goes into the game. And one last thing I want to mention for this is what I view to be the best 3D animation that isn't in a game. For that, I'm going to go with Jackerman. So if anybody's ever heard of Jackerman, you know what I'm talking about. And if you haven't, look it up, what he does with these Daz characters by bringing them into Blender and how crazy his animation skills are. It's just unbelievable. And then for another section, a fellow adult game dev duo, Stone Fox Studios, asked, what other projects inspired you to put yourselves out there? For me, this answer is simple, and this goes all the way back to when we originally started putting these games out for Prince of Suburbia. And the 2 games that I found that really excited me and made me think that I wanted to put ourselves out there were Summertime Saga and Dreams of Desire. It just kind of was a spark that went off, and I saw them. I thought they were so cool. I knew deep down that I wanted to try it and see if we could make something successful out of it. And here we are today. So that answers that question for you right there.
For A Shot in the Dark, I would say the games that most inspired us to feel like this was something that we could achieve and to put ourselves out there. I would say, obviously, again, Being a Dick is the game that paved the way for Western 3D adult visual novels. And Being a Dick is proof that one person can create a really high quality, successful game that sells well on Steam to a Western market and pretty much does everything well. Again, it's no mistake or coincidence that that's the game that brings most people into 3D adult visual novels, although more and more I'm seeing people say that Fresh Women was the game that brought them in. And I will also say that for me personally, Acting Lessons and Leap of Faith were 2 games for me that proved to me that people will like a game that has darker themes and topics. I think when we were first thinking about what the story would be for A Shot in the Dark, the reality is that you had played Acting Lessons many years before. I had not played Acting Lessons before. I had played Being a Dick. That said, I do think it's interesting that, obviously A Shot in the Dark is a college game, but it has a little bit darker themes. And so in that sense, it's a little bit like Acting Lessons. So it's kind of like a hybrid of the 2. But I will say that that's totally unintentional. I was actually really shocked when I played Acting Lessons because we'd already started developing A Shot in the Dark. And I was like, wow, this game is very similar to our game in terms of its themes and stuff like that. So, it was still validation for me, though, that people want that type of game, that just because it's a porn game or an adult game, that it doesn't have to always be happy-go-lucky. People are okay with exploring some things like mental health and trauma and some, darker topics like that. And then some non-adult games that also helped inspire me and give me confidence to put our work out there. Like I mentioned, I like story-based games like Night in the Woods and Disco Elysium that are not adult games, but are very story-driven games. And both of those games have very fleshed out main characters that are not always the most likable characters. They're kind of troubled. Maybe they haven't always made the best choices. Maybe they've made mistakes in their past and they're still reckoning with the consequences of those and what that means. And so for me, it was also an example of people want to play really defined characters, and that's something that people find interesting and that they want to play. So that gave me confidence with our game, since our game does have a main character that is more well-defined, is not really a self-insert, and struggles with his own things and is going to have his own arc in terms of development. I think that's something that's kind of polarizing. Not everybody wants that, but we can't please everybody. So all I needed to know is that there's definitely a large group of people that want a more interesting main character. I think that wraps up our episode where we discussed our favorite AVNs and the fellow developers that have inspired us in the past and now motivate us to keep going.
Remember, if you have more questions or topics you'd like us to discuss, please reach out to us on our various social media. We're excited to hear from you and answer whatever questions you might have. We hope we planted some seeds with you. See you next time.
Bye.